Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate you being in the audience today, and I hope you had a fun first round breakout session. I'm glad that you've come to this space to learn a little bit more about how you might use NSSE Data, the National Survey of Student Engagement, for those of you who may not speak or pronounce acronyms. So I'm only identified on my badge by NSSE. My name is Jillian Kinsey, and I work at the Indiana University Center for Post-Secondary Research, and I get to work on the National Survey of Student Engagement as pretty much a full-time gig, but I also work with the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. I don't even think I introduced myself in the first session. I just kind of launched right into things because I'm so excited to talk with you about this topic. But I'll give you at least a little bit of that background so you know kind of where I come from. But I'm really happy that I get to work on this nationwide project that now works with about 1,600 colleges and universities across the country. Now we'll celebrate 20 years of the National Survey next year. So that's quite a milestone in this work. And my goal here is to help the CSU think a little bit more, and you being the main actors in that environment, think a little bit more about how you might mine and maximize the treasure trove of data that you have from NSSE. And I want to know a little bit who's in the room. How many of you have primary responsibility? I'll use an official acronym in our office, CPM. You're the campus project manager of your NSSE data. Do we have any of those in the room? Okay, they all either thought they knew enough, they didn't need to be here, or they assigned you to come to this thing so that you would learn that. All right, so anybody know if they're the campus administrative contact at their campus? You're like the second in charge? Okay. Yes, oh, that's how you know. Yeah, if you're getting emails, you are one of those contacts. Yes, yes. Okay, good. I hope it's not too bad. All right, I won't look at you and see how bad the email chain is. Okay, good. Yeah, that's good. If you can, yeah, clutter collect. So, all right. So some of you who are getting emails, you might be what we call our campus administrative contact. So that is somebody who is a third, our second association. Our third association tends to be someone who has something to do with technology, because of the technology demands of delivering a survey to, in some cases, thousands of students on a campus in multiple forms, and particularly now that we're using more portals and more learning management systems to access students and to encourage their response, and a mobilized technology. We like to have that technology context, so sometimes that's a third contact as well. Anybody in that position? I had a technology person in the last session. Okay, no. All right, good. All right, so the rest of you, can I assign you the role of being miners and maximizers of your NSSE data? If you'll accept that role, I would grant it to you. Yes, that's right. Yes, not minor players or minor, yeah, nothing. Yeah, so really thinking about how do you mine your NSSE data, exactly. So that's what I'm trying to stimulate here, is really to get people to think a little bit more about how they might take advantage of the data you have. So I'm going to start by just orienting you and the audience that's viewing from their, I guess, their own desktops here with us today. On the streaming portion of this work is we formulated, or someone actually, it wasn't me, I sent some ideas, but somebody refashioned my work into something better to serve as a bit of an engagement guide for this work. So this might be something that you think about either while we're talking or while we're in this session, or that you think about back home or with other folks on your campus. I'm also assigning you, in addition to being miners and maximizers of this work, some role as emissary back to your campus to say, okay, I learned some things about NSSE data that I would like us to think about. Here are some questions that might help you further and deepen some of that work is to ask yourselves and to think about how your campuses use NSSE data to understand the student experience. That's the 30,000 foot question. How have you used your NSSE data to understand the quality and the overall student success dimensions of your student experience? And then a little more specifically is, have you used your data to try and understand the benefits of offering certain student programs? So are there certain programs that we offer either in advising that we can assess using results, or that we offer to particular student populations that we can isolate and look at those student populations, answer some of these questions about the effectiveness or the efficacy of those programs? And then are there practices that you might need to revisit on your campus because of your student engagement data that you see, uh-oh, our data look, we've got 3 years of data separated by 2 years in between, and it consistently looks poor on campus environment. I mean, I've had these consultations with people on campuses before. What do we do about it? So are there some things that you might revisit? And then finally, getting a little bit more specific to the graduation initiative, are there some ways that you might be able to start to connect your student engagement work to your graduation initiatives, the very specific things? I did not add this question, but somebody else did, and I thought this was kind of interesting, is this perception that do people on your campus see like a focus and collection on NSSE data as competing with the graduation initiative? I don't know if I like to frame it in that way. I guess I like to think of it as, how might your NSSE results align with your graduation initiative? And do people see that? Do they see the potential alignment between some of these efforts? So I'd like to, reframe that a little bit and take the competition out of it and really say, how might you align those things a little more effectively? So these are the kinds of questions. Does that seem like a reasonable thing to try and get into a little bit more? Anybody else come with a particular question? When you came into this session, you really wanted to know X? Okay, Stuart, yeah.
So, I'm actually going to give a presentation on our NSSE and FSE data next week.
Oh, good for you. Okay, Godspeed.
I had to come to this meeting.
All right, where are you from? Stanislaus? Okay.
So yeah, I'm doing it with someone else. So I guess what I am going to try to do, so I have the report, but also the raw data. And so what I want to do coming in here is sort of get some of the background on what that data really tells us.
Good.
Because there are those questions in there, and then you have the percentiles and all that kind of stuff. But what is the information in NSSE that is really going to be useful for me? And I like these questions that then I can help us to use it better on campus, because I don't know about other campuses, we generate a lot of data about a lot of things, a lot of reports. We pay for a lot of reports on various kinds of things. We get survey data, we collect our own data. But then maybe we don't use it as well as we could, and maybe for the amount of money that we put into it, we're probably not getting that back out. Yeah. And I think this is a massive data set. We're a small subset, of course, but what can we do to really maximize our use of our student NSSE data that, combined with all the greater kind of United States NSSE data that will help us to understand how we can do better stuff for our students.
Okay,
that's why I'm here.
Okay, excellent, good. Okay, we'll try and give you at least some tidbits into that work. Okay, good. Anybody else come with a specific question? All right, you're just here to be miners and maximizers. All right, okay, well, let's get you on your way. So a couple things I just want to point out. I think there's some really, clear connections between this project, the NSSE project, and your data, and the two CSU initiatives specifically. One is that mentions student engagement and well-being as an aspect of some initiatives within the CSU, and then the second is about data-driven decision-making. So both of these initiatives connect with NSSE data. I mean, obviously, the student engagement one, NSSE is less about aspects of well-being, perhaps, than this is really trying to capture, but I still think there are a lot of really important measures in NSSE that relate very closely to this, that have to do with students' sense of support on campus. I mean, that's a big aspect of their well-being, both in terms of personal and academic support, and then also even their use of campus recreation and some other things, and feeling overall support for their well-being. I mean, that is a question on NSSE that could be used to look at that well-being concept. But the data-driven one is obvious. The more we can help apply data to, real issues and concerns and questions that you have, the better. So I think it at least applies to both of those. But, what's really motivating this session is the opportunity. All 23 campuses have some form of NSSE result. Some campuses, it's a little bit older. But they're at least, I think that what we quoted in the program description was 18 or 16 have very fresh recent data. And we declare fresh as in the last 4 years. So you've got a real treasure trove right now, and it times nicely with your graduation initiative work. So for me, that is an opportunity in and of itself to have a conversation and to really nudge, push a little bit on how might you think about using your data towards the graduation initiative. And I framed 2 big questions, I think. I think student engagement, and I frame them as questions here, but I can also frame them as assertions. I think student engagement has a relationship, an important relationship to understanding retention and graduation and equity gaps. And I also think that NSSE can be used to help identify if there are programs that are working effectively. So if you are designing things for veteran students, we had San Bernardino in the room earlier, and they used their results to look at veteran student experiences because they had enough in the sample to actually start to see what is the veteran student experience in relation to other students, and are we serving those students? Are they engaged in the same way as our non-veteran students? So can you use your results to actually help provide evidence of the effectiveness of programs, or to point out what programs might be needed to make the case for something else because of your results? So I think these are 2 questions that are really driving this session here today. Now, this is the wall of participation information that I think really makes the point. There's a lot of data out there. And I hope you've all kind of discovered or can see your own campus on this list and notice that, you've got multiple years of data. I don't know what else, anybody else notice anything else on this list that you want to ask about or point out, or an observation you make about this? Yeah, Stuart.
What is BCS?
Okay, yep, good. I'm glad somebody asked about the acronyms I throw up here. So the Beginning College Survey of Student Engagement, the BESE, is designed for entering students. So this is something that students are invited to complete either before they at orientation, before they've ever had a class, or within that first couple days of a campus experience or a undergrad experience. And it asks them about their expectations for engagement, about their high school experience, a little bit about some of their academic challenges or worries or concerns. It asks a little bit about their academic perseverance even. So that's a measure that's pre-college. And then the FSE, the faculty survey, the other acronym up there, is the companion instrument to NSSE that essentially asks faculty, to what extent do you believe students are engaged in these dimensions? But it also asks faculty about the extent to which they do the things that are supposed to be engaging students. And it asks a little bit about the importance they attach to some activities in their own work. So those can be really nice connections to make. So the BESE and the NSSE connection is nice to say the students' expectations match what they actually do, where are we off? And then the FSE and NSSE has that same kind of expectations, not so much expectations, but just what the faculty do and what do students experience, question and answer that you can do. So anything else you notice about these patterns or?
I think some far fewer number of campuses are engaged in NSSE or whatever, BESE in 2018.
Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, so different cycles. Yeah, so 2018. Yep. So yeah, there are, I mean, the interesting thing is that cycles are all determined by the campuses themselves. So you're all on your own cycle here. So there's been no attempt. I think there were a couple attempts to try and get CSUs on the same schedule so that there was some energy, some opportunity to do some work together. But you know how that goes. There are lots of things influencing. Yeah, so I mean, almost everybody has the last 2 years. So 17, you'll notice, I'm sorry, this isn't exactly the best view. The idea was to overwhelm you, so I'm glad I achieved that. Yeah. So 17 is actually a slightly higher participation year. Yep. Yes.
Seems like that there's
Sorry, I should remind you that we need to use the mic so we can get the questions recorded. Thank you.
it looks like that there are universities, I don't know when NSSE started, but
2000.
yeah, so we have early adopters and a number of early adopters. That's kind of interesting.
Yes, it is. And I think what this to me suggests, and that I hope you're getting from this, is you can really do some interesting longitudinal, you know, so if people say, well, it used to be a lot different at our campus. Okay, well, actually, it really wasn't. Or you can say, yeah, it really is. We're seeing some significant differences in the way our students are engaged than they were 10 years ago. So that's an interesting point about now the depth of data you have. So I put this up here to suggest that you go in and get to know a little bit more about your participation cycle, maybe what motivated that, what's the quality of data across all those years, who else is in the same cycle as you, and maybe you can, you know, maybe you do want to pair up or see if you can talk with them about what they learned from their 17 data. So an opportunity here. So I really think there's a lot here. So if you're not mining your data, to me, it's kind of a waste of a lot of really good information. So that's the encouragement. So I want to tease you first with some actual data to get you to think a little bit about how some of the NSSE results might relate to graduation initiatives. So here's my, you know, really quick surfacey attempt to start to lift up some data that might relate to graduation initiatives. So imagine if these data were yours. So, you know, these aren't anybody's in the room, but if these were your data, and you were thinking about your graduation initiative, do you see any relationship that 28% of your first year students have never had a conversation about career plans with a faculty member or advisor in their first year? None, zero. They actually reported zero. Okay, I think that's a little concerning that, you know, particularly after Tim's talk yesterday about career relevance and having students understand what the job market is and that. Second data point I just put up here, and that's a real data point. It'll come back in a little bit, you'll see later on. Black and Latino students rate the environment for academic support lower than their peers at comparison institutions. So presumably the comparison institutions are meaningful to the campus. All right, well, Black and Latino students rate the environment as less supportive. To me, might be a concern. Yes, please.
It might be a concern.
Yeah, you have to use the mic again. I'm sorry.
It might be a concern.
Thank you.
But I am wondering if we don't know what the rate is for all students at that institution. I'm not sure what that data point alone would tell us.
Well, you can answer that question. Yeah, so maybe that's the three-part display. Here's our overall score. Here's our African American and Latino student score, and then here is that African American student and Latino score in comparison to others, and here's our comparison to the overall comparison. So I'd lay those 4 points out, and you could do that with your results, and then get some of that context, and then maybe see, okay, what does this suggest? So that might be a good approach. Yeah, I would add that to it too. All right, so these are two concerning data points, and I think I can immediately start to think about the connection to graduation. I hope you are. Let me throw up one more just to get you further. I don't know, this is the data tease right at the beginning. So what if you saw these data that high impact practices, this is data about first year students plan to do these high impact practices, these 4, research with faculty, internship, study abroad, or culminating student experience, a capstone, and broken out by first generation status. So the first thing you might notice is what? What do you notice about the blue bars? Yeah, they're lower across the board. And this is actually, I am using our aggregate data. So these data are, if I were to replicate this bar graph on a campus, it actually tends to be more dramatic, particularly at places that have high proportions of first generation students. So it tends to be even more dramatic difference. You know, but if this were your campus's data, let's just pretend, I mean, that might be enough just to say, okay, we could think about how to start to tie that to our graduation initiative. If you have any kind of career-related initiatives, if you have any kind of programs that are specifically designed to help support African American and Latino students' success, or if you're trying to invest in the ever popular high-impact practices, this might be pretty motivating right away. Does anybody else see any connections, or do you want to disagree with me about how this is motivating? See those? Can you ask Stuart?
might encourage your students to do more research with faculty. They're already going to dive in to do an internship, 75%. And so maybe that one-on-one research with faculty, that could be emphasized. And if you could get it up to 50, then that's better.
So this
Or
might
something
be,
like that.
yes, there might be some opportunity to kind of do some more thoughtful, okay, let's see if we can get every student to kind of think about how to do this. Maybe you could analyze this to say, does everybody at least, do all these first year students at least think about one experience they expect to have? So you could do a little deeper dive into this, or think about it from a programmatic sense of, okay, how do we motivate our students to have, you know, expectations are one thing or one aspect of the student experience. If students don't have expectations for participating in an internship or study abroad, it's going to be hard to change that. So this is kind of your base level expectation information. So just to get you going on thinking about some of this, I thought that would be at least be a little bit of a tease, and we'll kind of come back to some of these later. But my goal here is really simple. You know, I'm trying to stimulate some thinking about how you might use NSSE broadly as a research-based project. So it's grounded in research about student success measures, how it can help inform your work. So the project is already aligned with student success dimensions. The items already ask students about the things we know matter for success. And then you can use your local data, your actual data on this, to inform your improvement efforts. And the issue about improvement is a foundational goal and aim of NSSE. Is it's got to be about improvement. It's not about rating. It's not about ranking. It's not about evaluating in a course sense. It's really about helping campuses identify where they want to improve. So the strength of the tool is really because it's based on what we know to be important for student success. When students are engaged in what we call educationally purposeful activities, we're not just asking students about any old experience that they have at the institution. We're asking them about their engagement in things we know matter for their success. So we know from decades of research that when students do more of these things, now they get better grades, they're more likely to be retained, they graduate, and they learn. So those are all important measures. So that should be something we should all at least have some confidence in terms of the value of thinking about engagement to the important graduation outcomes. And it was foundational to the design of the whole instrument. So the whole instrument is designed to amplify the important concepts of student success, and then ask students about the extent to which they are engaged in academic activities and good practices in undergraduate education, and then the behavioral manifestations of that in terms of how much time they spend, the frequency with which they do these things. So there are strong behavioral elements, and then it's also important to get their perception too around certain dimensions. Perception is a very important dimension when we're talking about quality of relationships and even their perceptions of environmental support. We can ask them about how much they take advantage of support services, but getting their perception about, is this a place you really feel supported, is another dimension of importance to student success. So that's what we're measuring. And every year we go in and actually re-examine those connections when we can, to identify, are the engagement indicators still performing in that way? And this was a recent analysis we did. Now, the challenge with this is we don't collect data about retention and graduation. So what we're relying on in this analysis are institution level scores. So this is a really gross measure of retention and graduation to some equally big measures of engagement indicators, and we're still seeing a correlation between these two big things. So it's important to keep pressing on that. But what I want to do more from this slide is, I'll show you the results here, is to encourage you to do this kind of analysis on your own campus. CSU campuses can add retention and graduation data to your NSSE data file and see if these relationships hold true for your campus. So if you have any of you done that? You don't, who knows? Yeah, okay, you're minors, you're gonna be explorers in this. Okay, I do know of CSUs that have done this. Cal State Northridge is kind of my standout for a lot of this work. They've done a lot on this over time. And they have a relationship. Some of the patterns are a little bit different than this, and that makes sense. You want to discover your own patterns. But the important part of this slide is really just to, again, reestablish and affirm the relationship between graduation and retention. Now, the two that, are always stand out that are huge correlations are hours per week studying. How much time students dedicate to academic work is still a big factor in retention and graduation. Can't get around that. And nicely, the amount that they collaborate with their peers in learning is also positively associated. Some of the ones that are closer to the line there, the black line that indicates, less of a correlation or no correlation. Interesting that it's student-faculty interaction. I mean, usually people's eyes are drawn to that one. They kind of go right there. And it's not necessarily that it's negative, and although that one on retention kind of does cross over into the negative area. It's not significant though. But it just shows that student-faculty interaction is actually a little bit of a mixed bag item, because it's about, a lot of it is about students who need to discuss their poor academic performance or their perhaps academic challenges that they're having a lot of interaction with faculty. So it's actually one of those items that may not be the best in terms of predicting retention and graduation. So really an important thing to look at your own campus. My point of this is to really encourage you to think about, could you do this analysis? Given the treasure trove of data we just saw that exist, could you look at that 2014 cohort now and start adding graduation and retention data to that? So that's my encouragement. We also know a lot about all the rage or high impact practices. How many of you are doing something with high impact practices on your campus? Okay, yes, it is a rage in this room. Yep. So we're all, they're not a panacea. They are, they might seem like a real silver bullet in terms of the success rates and what we want students to do. They are transformative experiences. There's no denying that, and they do help students deepen their learning in all the ways we want, but they're not a panacea. We do know that we did this analysis just this past year with students who indicate in their first year that they've done any of these high impact practices, and there is a bump to retention by, merely being in this experience. There's an associated increase in retention. And we also, when we looked a little deeper by SAT scores, I realized that's just one measure, that's the one we have, about entering students' board score, so their entering capacity or preparation, at least by that measure. The students who are in the lower quartile actually benefit more. So if they're in one of these high impact practices, it actually improves their retention rate with a greater percentage point increase. So these are the overall, and then the SAT score for the lowest quartile, actually it's 7% gain. So that's pretty significant. So I want to elevate kind of high impact practices in that way, particularly learning communities and research with faculty. That's important to think about. So more evidence that kind of there is this relationship with retention and graduation. High impact practices we know are positively associated with student success, but again, there are cautions I always want to issue with this because they're not a silver bullet. We have to be concerned about quality, so just naming them a high impact practice does not make it so. I feel like this is a real important qualifier. They have to be of high quality. We have to make sure that there's a whole report on the qualities that need to be instilled in high impact practices for them to be high impact. And then we also have a real equity challenge because we still know that in some ways high impact practices are selective. So only some students get to do them. Sometimes it's by their own device. Sometimes it's by if they're knit into some majors and not others. They're differentially distributed. So we do need to think about the equity issue if we're going to keep talking about the promise of high impact practices. So that's just my caution I always like to throw up on this. The other caution I want to put up is about what student engagement means. And just to clear up or to make sure that we're clear on what student engagement is really all about. Student engagement is not the onus of the student. Student engagement is about the responsibility for student engagement is as much on the institution, if not more on the institution than on the student. So this is not a motivation issue. This is about institutions setting up the conditions and the environments so that students can be successful. So we have to be accountable around these dimensions. And we need to think about how do we ensure that students routinely engage in these practices at high levels. So that's an important thing. And I have to credit Stephen Quay and Sean Harper for really pointing that out that we can't think that of this as being something that's a student's responsibility. We want students to be engaged, but we have to do something about it. So let me give you a little bit of a recipe for thinking about how we think about how NSSE is connected to the larger student success agenda. First is that it is really important to ask students about their experience. So anytime we're talking about student success initiatives, we really need to make sure that we're using data that is asking students directly about their experiences. We also, so that's one of the benefits. The other thing is that we like to think, and I hope this is true, we provide easy to understand reports. I'm making that claim. I'm going to go with it until somebody tells me the reports are not easy to understand. But that was part of the NSSE project from the get-go, is we didn't want to just deliver a data file. We wanted to make sure that campuses had some reports that they could immediately look to get some sense of how they're doing. Third thing is that this is about acting on evidence. And this one quote I think is really important, particularly after the question that Tim Rennick got at the end of his session yesterday about the asking for additional evidence. And we are not in the business of doing randomized controlled trials. That's just not part of educational research. It is in some contexts, and we do need to do that when it's feasible. But in most of the cases, that's not a feasible model for a lot of the work that we do. So I think, and particularly when NSSE has pitched as an assessment approach, that we're trying to see, do we have good enough information to make, to try something different that might benefit our students? So that's what we're trying to do, is at least use good enough information. I don't think that's an understatement at all, but I think that is what we should try and think about. So we want to act on the evidence. And then finally, we need to think about this as a full assessment cycle. So we want to return to the data to see, if we did something, did it make a difference in the way that we had hoped? Did it change anything? So this is the idea. This is how we hope to generate evidence to inform student success. And this is, I hope you've been reflecting the whole time about, are you doing these things? Are you using your data in this way? Have you thought about it in this way? So are you making the most of your results? This is meant to be a reflective moment. I'll let you reflect on that. Perhaps you're already thinking, uh-oh, maybe we're not, or I don't know, but we'll see. So how are campuses? I actually sent a note out to our campus project managers and got about half responded in some way what they were doing with their NSSE results related to graduation initiatives. So I want to walk you through two. Anybody from San Bernardino here? I can talk about Miro was here in the other previous session. So this is what San Bernardino's doing. When I asked them, how are you using NSSE and is it connected at all to your graduation initiative? This is what they replied with. So some real examples. They're doing some data sharing sessions by actually going out to talk with faculty and staff so that they're what they call, I like this, data impact session. So they are, here's what we know, and they actually have some examples. If you go to their website, you can see the actual presentations that they've done. I can't remember who has videos, but one has videos on it too. They also, I think, are nicely connecting their NSSE data. They're not going out only with their NSSE data. They're actually connecting it using their CIRP, their Cooperative Institutional Research, the UCLA, I'm going to throw a lot of acronyms here, the HARRY Project survey, the first year results, and other factors like grades and retention rate and comparisons between their two campuses out there. They're including that in all of their data. So doing some deeper dive analyses. They hope to actually add their graduation rate data. They're poised to add graduation rates to their NSSE data file just based on now graduating cohorts. And they are processing their NSSE data, their 2018 data, when I asked them this question, about linking students who receive specific services. So San Bernardino, I mentioned earlier, is a place where they have a lot of veteran students. They've been looking at their veteran population, and they can identify those students in their data file to see if the programs are those students having a better experience than they did even 5 years ago before we had those programs. So I thought this was a really nice example of what they're thinking about doing. So I hope, Stuart, this helps you with some of your work and your impending presentation. So nice model. I'll offer one more and then maybe we can pause for a moment. Humboldt State also replied. Anybody from Humboldt here? Okay, so Oh, they're not coming to get full credit for their work here. They were in the previous session too. So student engagement, they think a little differently. So I think they're a nice balance to the San Bernardino one that was a little more focused on sharing data and assessing programs. Humboldt actually did a little more partnering with their Center for Teaching and Learning on results to see, all right, what data relate to faculty development initiatives and to teaching and learning practices that we could actually see a difference maybe in some of our gateway courses. So faculty who are trying to make gateway courses more interactive or more engaging, they're actually using some of their data to suggest here are aspects of student engagement that are historically low or that we need to make sure we continue to bolster because it's a strength. So they're connecting it a little bit more to teaching and learning, and they are, of course, sharing with campus leadership. And then again, when I asked this question, they were just getting NSSE data back from 2018. So they're also trying to see, okay, have we made any movement around some of the dimensions we're interested in? So I think those are all really positive. And again, they have some of their display out there too. All right, so I hope those are at least a little positive. Let me show you a little bit more then to help you think about how you might do some of those things that they're doing. NSSE can be used in lots of ways, and I'm going to offer 3 ideas that I think might be helpful to you. One is I think it can be used at a really high level to identify what are we doing well and what might we need to be shore up on our campus. So very quickly, okay, here's what we can say confidently about the student experience. The second is a little deeper, more of what San Bernardino was trying to do, where they're triangulating it with other data and information. So they really are trying to take action on evidence, and then as you saw in both Humboldt and San Bernardino, they're trying to see if what they're doing is making a difference. So holding up, okay, here are the NSSE measures we hope to affect. We hope there's some difference in what happens with our first-year students than it was 3 years ago. And then the last is to disaggregate. And I think the more you can start to get into your data, remember, you have a data file that has every student identified, so you can add any other information about them and into your analyses and study student populations or to study students who have changed majors, or that point this morning that I think Jeff Gold made about undeclared students. Let's look at those populations and see if they look different than our students who are direct entry into business or whatever the major programs. I think there's a lot of really interesting work to do on majors, and that is actually a secret, not a secret really, not meant to be a secret, but where we see some of the greatest differences in engagement is by major. That is huge. So if you can at least go into broad major categories, even if it's like social sciences or business, I think there's some real clues there about what's going on within, particularly at large institutions, even more, what's going on in the student experience, very shaped by their college or school. So let me point out a few things about how to do those. So those were the broad strokes, broad ways into this. So I'm going to walk you through a NSSEville state. It's it's real data, but there is no NSSEville state, in case you start to look up. Yeah, there is no NSSEville state, but the data are real. And I just use it to point out kind of some different ways of thinking. So all of these exist, all of the examples or all the things I'll show you exist in your own data files. So the first really high gloss approach that I suggested, kind of looking broadly at what's going well, where are the strengths, and what you might need to shore up. The easiest thing to start looking at are the engagement indicators. There are 10 of them. You can look at them for first year and first year and seniors. And there's a lot there. Each of these 10 engagement indicators is backed up by 3 or 4, or some places 5 items that are behind the engagement indicators. So the engagement indicators are a composite measure of those individual items. So I think that's a great place to start, just to think about that. And you can start by, this is all of the items that are behind those engagement indicators. So, and this isn't even all the items. So, there's actually more, but you can start by looking at statistical significance. So that's probably the easiest way into this at the beginning, is say, all right, we got a lot of information here. Where are we different than our comparison institutions that we selected? You've got 3 at least. One of them's got to be at least a little bit meaningful to you. So what's statistically significant? And that might be a place to start. And then say, gosh, that's not either, boy, that matches what I believe, and that's what we know about our campus. Our students are historically low around these things. Or you can say, this actually contradicts some of the things that we say about ourselves. What's that all about? So I think it can give you a real way in to start with the statistical differences. But that's just the beginning. And we've tried to make this easy. This is where I try and illustrate the easy to comprehend digestible reports. I hope these are easy to comprehend. We moved to these upward and downward facing triangles several years ago as a better way than the asterisks, the triple asterisks to indicate statistical significance. So you can see the key over here, but essentially anytime a triangle is pointing up and it's filled in, that's statistically significant and positive. It's pointing down and not filled in, I mean, there's the whole combination. If there's a dash, then that means that you're just on par. So the idea was to make them a little, kind of the data that's significant should jump out. That's the idea. But this is just the high gloss level. But I think immediately you might be drawn to, okay, where are arrows pointing down? Where do we need to really think about these things? And you might say, okay, we seem to have some real strengths in collaborative learning, for example. What's behind that? How do we make sure that continues on our campus? So lots of ways to look at the engagement indicators for strengths and weaknesses. And then another approach, though, is to look at those same engagement indicators to say, all right, I'm not going to look at statistical significance right away. I want to look at what's important to us. What do we claim about our students' experience and what's important? Are we doing things well? Are the right proportions of students saying they're engaged at high levels around the things that we claim? I mean, that to me seems like a real kind of minimal level expectation of an institution. So I think that's a neat way to do it. One of the devices, one of the little tactics I use when I've done workshops with faculty and with staff on campuses is to invite them to do some predictions and make some preferences known around engagement indicators before sharing the data. So I'll just offer this as a fun little way to engage your audience in thinking about it. Instead of giving them the results right, I'll say, how do you think we perform on this? And you can use some really simple things. You don't have to go to numbers or percents or anything, but just say, yeah, I think higher order is a strength, and I prefer it remain a strength. Or I think it's really not something we do very well, but I'd prefer it to be a strength. So you can kind of do a little bit of that. Let's get some expectations going about what your results are, and then reveal the results. And then talk about, okay, where are we performing in alignment with our expectations and our beliefs? And then where are we disconnected? So this can often be a good exercise to do. And we put these workshops together. There are worksheets together. They're on our website. You can look for them if you want to play around with that with your faculty. So that's the second way in, is really starting with more of a kind of beliefs and your own expectations. You can also then dig deeper into each of those engagement indicators. As I said, they're all backed up by lots of other individual items. And that is often where the real meat is. So you might see your score looks pretty good, but you might want to know what's really driving that score. Are there some items that just seem like they're the most important aspect of our students' experience? Is what's really driving, for example, our high score on reflective and integrative learning? That happens to be my favorite engagement indicator. I think it's really a telltale sign of like how academically intense and interesting a place is by its reflective and integrative learning item. But you could look at that and say, it's really something that is about connecting students to real world problems, or it's really about providing an occasion for students to do reflection on their learning. That might be something that's really interesting to your faculty. So dive deeper into the engagement items to look at those items. And we help you do that. We provide you a couple of ways right off the bat. The snapshot report that is the page 3 of that whole triangle piece, has all the engagement indicators in high and low performing. I'll show you that in a second. We also have frequency and statistical comparison reports that get you even way into the weeds. I don't even dare show that. It's such a massive report. But those are all supposed to help you get into things pretty easily. This is the page that gets you into engagement indicator items that just hits the highs and lows. So I could see a whole session just around where are we high, where are we low? in the first year, and what does that say about ourselves? Does that demonstrate the student experience at all? You know, are we concerned at all that our students are not having, in this case, a lot of discussions with diverse others around people with a different ethnicity to their own? They're doing that at a much lower level than other doctoral comparative institutions. So lots of ways in on the engagement. So start mining with questions about quality. So here's my kind of attempt to try and get to think about, it's not just about letting the data drive the initiative or anything. It's really about starting with some questions. So, you know, what aspects of student engagement can first-year students reliably expect to experience on our campus? What do we see over time that we can say, you know, we have this. We've got collaborative learning. It's a strength. Let's make sure that we don't lose it. How are we going to ensure that it is available to everybody equally? So there might be some ways in to look at that, you know, and look at multiple administrations to answer that question. So where are our strengths? The second piece, second way in to mine and with questions a little bit more than kind of just starting with the data is, let's do a lot more mapping. So could you map your graduation initiative, what you're planning, whether that's advising or enhanced career initiatives, or if it's about delivering more focused, targeted programs to particular student populations, whatever it is, can you map any of that to particular NSSE items? So if you were to put those, you know, your two things side by side, let me give you the whole survey, do any of the things speak to each other in any way? And let's just focus on those things. So what do we want to almost monitor in a dashboardy kind of way that are connected? And then how can you share that data with people who are working on those initiatives on a regular basis? So to me, that's more important than sending the whole darn report out to everybody and saying, okay, what do you make of this? And then finally, you know, really honing in on a concern, I think, is another way. And I'll just illustrate with a question that I had when I was starting to think about this, and it resonates nicely with some of the stuff that Tim Rennick raised yesterday about career preparation, is, all right, are there NSSE results that relate to a real pressing question in higher education right now that's about students' broad access and career preparation and the opportunities that they get to have applied experiences? Those are real pressing issues in higher ed quality. So could we create just a digestible data bite around just those items? And there might only, my count is there are about 5 or 6 items that speak to those topics on the survey. Let me just share those with people. So I'm gonna play that out. I'm gonna play that scenario out and what those data points might look like. So if NSSEville State, as my example institution, believes that more career prep, kind of real world experiences might be important, what do NSSE results suggest? So let's play this out. Here's a couple of those data points I just mentioned. Talking about career plan, I tease you with some of those. Here's the other way to look at that exact same data point. I presented it as a never experience. So, you know, essentially I just showed you how many our first year students say never. Now I'm going to show you, this is how many students say often, very often, or sometimes. So this is, you know, just everybody else essentially. So 72% indicate that they at least sometimes talked about this, but the comparison institutions is 83%. So to me, this helps make a case for, all right, we might need to do something more around career conversations. So either we need to figure out a different source or site of that conversation to bolster this, or we need to figure out how to make that more a part of conversations with our faculty, given the pressure on career prep. So that might be one item to share as part of those data bites. A couple of other data bites that I think that work to the applied experiences are, what if NSSEville State also discovered at the same time that their first year students were having low proportions, or at least low levels of experience in applying facts, theories, methods to practical problems and new situations in their courses. They weren't gaining work-related knowledge, and their interests in internships were actually pretty high 75% plan to do. So how could we package all that and think a little bit more comprehensively about career-related information and applied experiences? So that's one way to kind of package data towards a graduation initiative. Another one that you might look at, I know several campuses are doing advising work. So advising, if you want to assure a more positive advising support, you might just look at, there's one question on NSSE about advising, and it's about the quality of interaction with an advisor. And we've tested lots of items. We even have a topical module on advising that gets a lot deeper into advising practice that many CSUs have done. Those are great, but believe it or not, this one question really is a great distinguishing question about advising experiences. If students rate the quality of their interaction with an academic advisor as low, it actually is a pretty big marker of a problem with advising overall. Lots of problems with advising. In this case, at NSSE State, they seem to have a little bit of a problem with their advising. The triangle was pointing low on this one as a statistically significant difference. 43% of students indicate, only 43% indicate on that high side versus 50% at comparison institutions. So you can imagine disaggregating this by college or program. That might make it even more meaningful to think about. So lots of different ways to think about how it could connect to just two of the graduation initiatives that I've seen advocated. So I think you can really, I hope I'm encouraging you or providing you some way of thinking about how you might use your results to tell a little bit more comprehensive a story. So you could tell a story about, here's where our students are most engaged. How do we keep pressing and pushing on those paths? Here are some things where we might need to increase engagement, or maybe we started to tell the story about change. We found that students were less engaged, or we feared that they were, and we did these things as part of our initiative, and now we see our scores look different. So this might affirm some of your work or give you some confidence in where things are headed. So those are my big NSSE points, and I'm just going to close out with just a couple of reminders here that I'm probably not going to have as much time to dig in as I wanted, but disaggregation, very important. Thank you very much. So the disaggregation element, I just can't emphasize enough, and there's plenty, I think there's a lot you can do on this in terms of not only using the demographic information that is already part of your NSSE survey, but by all means use those your student identified data file to add additional demographic information to get at student population, or to get at students who have been in a learning community on your campus to study the effect of that learning community, or to study students who did service learning if that's a big aspect of your experience. Do those students have a very different experience than those who are not in service learning? Or for those who indicate that they feel a great deal of academic support, do those students have different experience than others? So that level of disaggregation is important. I want to, we saw some incredible dashboard displays from Jeff Gold this morning. So this one just looks pathetic in comparison to what he showed when, things were populating live on the screen. But this is just a simple Tableau dashboard that, this is actually from Utah State. Oops. Utah State actually devised this pretty nice Tableau where they have their NSSE advising questions in their Tableau database. So you can look at 14 to 17. So a department, an academic division could look at the difference between those two, then dig in. They also could look at racial ethnic differences just around this one question. So I think this is the kind of data that we want to get, and that you can pull into a dashboard display if you have this capacity. This is using Tableau, one simple means. So think about this. Yeah, Stuart. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So this is really, so in this dashboard, they didn't just make the cool colored lines. That's actual drawing data from the NSSE results.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
actual real data.
Okay.
Yeah, no fooling.
Awesome.
Yep. So I think this is a cool disaggregation. The other, I mentioned high impact practices earlier and first generation status. That was part of the teaser slide as well. I'm bringing back to this because this is actually what it looks like across first generation students. This is actual having done HIPS. The piece I showed you earlier was plan to do. This is what it looks like for first generation. So it doesn't look good for first generation students. The gap here, particularly excuse me, around internship is really severe. That is statistically significant. It is, I don't like looking at this. The only place that it's different is around service learning, where first-gen students are having equal experiences, but the other areas less so. So I think this is the kind of disaggregation I'd like to see in more of the work that we're doing. And, you know, the whole idea here is to stimulate some action. So I really don't know why we're doing NSSE or why anybody's doing it if we're not using the results to some degree to, you know, prompt some action on our campus. It can provide an occasion to bring people together for conversation. To me, that may seem like a low bar, but this is the most important element, is really to bring people together to have questions about topics of concern. So if we're going to bring career advisors together, we're going to bring people to talk about advising, let's present some data to them that might be relevant. One of the biggest things I want to encourage, given the depth of data across multiple years that the CSUs have, is about the message about using the data you have to try and monitor and detect changes over time. To give yourself credit where you've made a difference, let's see if things look better for either the whole first year or for particular populations in the first year. Do that kind of analysis over time. So I'll end with this one just to say, you know, okay, the first one I showed you how a couple have used their data. Now, how might you connect your data to the graduation initiative? So I hope you've been thinking about that the whole time. All right, so do you have some questions? Are there some things? Yeah, Andrew, love to.
Thank you. So really interesting presentation, thinking about specifically how NSSE might be used to engage graduation initiative. So here's a question around response rate and thinking about how institutions can proactively try to boost response rate, and have you thought about ways in which the graduation initiative presents an opportunity to communicate about NSSE in a way that might help improve that? If you
know, that's
thoughts.
a great idea. Yeah. So, I mean, response rates, you know, a persistent challenge in this work, although, you know, thankfully they're not dropping further, despite the fact that we've got a lot of competition out there for student survey attention. So we need to keep thinking about how we're taking advantage of portals and learning management systems and mobile optimized surveys, the fact that students can now complete the survey on their phone. But I really like your idea of connecting it to making that the important element of a graduation initiative. Is how do we express to students, in order to help you be successful here, we need to know about the quality of your experience. So tell us what's working, what's not working, what you're experiencing, what you're not experiencing, because these things matter for your graduation success. That is a really nice idea. Okay, can you drive that home? I'd like more campuses to do that. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think many of the campuses are, sorry. Yeah. I just want to say, I think many of the campuses are dealing locally with thinking about how they expand the vista around the graduation initiative to different groups of stakeholders, different audiences. So faculty, administrators, staff, but also students and what it means. And so sort of different types of communication plans. And so, yeah, so I think this has there's multiple, and because there's multiple types of surveys, right there, it speaks to the different types of communication plans too, because there's a faculty, there's the FSE, and then the BSE.
Yeah, so you could do the same appeal to faculty.
Yeah.
Help us know more about how we might change and improve and assure that the faculty experience is supportive of the student experience. Yeah, nice, good. Good. Anybody else have an idea? Is this stimulating your thinking? All right. So my last point is, if there's a question, if this also stimulated a question or a problem, or here's where we're stuck, call our office. We would love to help with this. We have analysts who are, basically standing by, waiting to do these kind of interesting things. So if you have a question, call us. We're out there. So thank you all for your participation. If anybody has particular questions, I'm happy to talk after this. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate your attention. So you are all designated minors and maximizers now. Thanks.